All right, it is 1:30 and we're gonna get started. I would like to introduce you all to David's mentor. It's Christian is with the U.S. Forest Service. He has been working there in restoration and climate change and that intersection also with community for more than 20 years. This project is based in that work. And I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Christian, so you can introduce David.
Great, thank you. I do want to start by saying that I actually had a really small role on this project. Enormous credit to JP for being in the field and supporting a lot of the work. So I will be very straight up that my role was small in this. But as small as my role was, David's role obviously was huge in really pulling together an amazing project. David is a person from our amazing Hawaii island. He has been a member of the conservation community for a while, going on a decade, working with a number of our really important conservation partners, the Bisque, working in dryland restoration at Kaupulehu, working at that intersection of conservation and food security and food sustainability. David completed his Bachelor of Arts degree at Hilo, his class of 2019, where he majored in geography and again, working on that intersection with food security, left with a certificate in beekeeping as well. And now he is going to present some really exciting work to all of us. Work that he partnered with JP to really pull together and execute in partnership with the Kaiaulu of Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, lineal descendants who have launched a community-based subsistence forest area, the Kaiaulu Puʻuwaʻawaʻa project. I have been lucky enough to be in a position to help support that project. In no way have I contributed nearly as much as a large number of other people to the project, but I'm happy to say that I haven't gotten in the way. So with that, really honored to pass the mic to David. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there. I'm in a workshop here in Honolulu, but just really proud of the work that you've done, David, and yeah. Pass it to you, and thank you for all the great work.
All right. Okay. All right, mahalo, Christian. Mahalo for the great introduction, and really just for being there, part of the project. And also want to give a shout out to Jonathan Price, too, who's somewhere out there in the Zoom world, and all the other people who might be attending from Kaiaulu Puʻuwaʻawaʻa. Also want to shout out to the funder for my specific project, the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, or PICAS, for just funding the project and supporting me through this journey of mine. And I'm going to present to you here. So yeah, so the title of this presentation is Understanding Plants of the Past Inform Community Restoration Efforts in the Future. A place-based approach to promoting resilience in the Puʻuwaʻawaʻa community-based subsistence forest area. And it takes place in North Kona, Hawaii. You can see there's a picture of the puʻu there. But yeah, just jumping in, I want to go over a quick little outline of what I'm going to talk about. Really just going to go over some background information of Puʻuwaʻawaʻa and the general study area, and then kind of some of the land use history and just details on the project. And then after that, I'll kind of go over some of the goals of the project and kind of the approach that we took to achieve those goals, and then some of the outcomes we've reached so far in the project. And then also some of the conclusions and future work that are in the works. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to really just start with the moʻokuaʻawaʻa, or the genealogy of Nā Puʻu, which is the study area. And it is Ohualalai ke kupuna hine hanau ia o Puʻuwaʻawaʻa kamakua o Puʻuʻanahulu, or kamakua o Puʻuwaʻawaʻa kamakua hanau ia o Puʻuʻanahulu ke keiki. Apologies for that. But that basically reads Hualalai, the grandmother, gives birth to Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, the mother, and Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, the mother, gives birth to Puʻuʻanahulu, the keiki. And that is really just the Hawaiian perspective of the geological process that you see in this area, and really just telling us that Hualalai erupted, forming Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, and then Puʻuwaʻawaʻa erupted, having its own eruption for Puʻuʻanahulu, which is in the foreground there. And then you can see Puʻuwaʻawaʻa here in the middle ground, and of course Hualalai in the back there. So yeah, this kind of just to give a little setting of this area. And then kind of stepping back a little bit, I just want to go over the lands of Kekaha Waiʻole, which I believe Avalon actually mentioned in her presentation, but is basically that it's the waterless lands of Kekaha, which is pretty self-explanatory. But it stretches from Puʻuʻanahulu here in the north, and then all the way to Keohulo over there in the south. And the moʻokuaʻawaʻa of Nā Puʻu, or Nā Puʻu Pualu Kinikini, or Nā Puʻu for short, is actually just these two ahupua'a of, and for the people on Zoom, I'm not gonna do it. Sorry, Zoomies. It's really just the ahupua'as of Puʻuʻanahulu and Puʻuwaʻawaʻa. And it's a hilly environment, of course, Puʻuwaʻawaʻa being one of the main hills, but there's numerous other pu'us, which kind of gives that name. And for anybody who's driven through there, you'll kind of see there's more than just Puʻuwaʻawaʻa. But yeah, so kind of bringing your attention to just kind of that general area again. It's a very dry area, and it's characterized by dryland forests. But of course, dryland forests are one of the most endangered habitats in Hawaii, and really in the world. Estimates are out there of less than 10%, and some are actually closer to maybe 5 or even 1%, depending on really how you look at it. But this picture really kind of sums up that for North Kona and Kohala area. Just as you can see, just vast amounts of mostly grassland, which really formerly used to be a lot more dryland forest than is pictured in this. It was just something, I really didn't know growing up. And I think it's something that I think a lot of people should be aware of, just as, it's a very rare habitat, and it needs a little attention. But yeah, so some of the big factors affecting these habitats are really wildfire is a big one. Just in 2021, we had the biggest fire on record actually on Hawaii Island, and really in Hawaii overall. And that's some of the damage and aftermath of that can be seen on the right here. And this is some of the dust storms created from all of that. And then there's also another fire at Puʻuʻanahulu. I believe it was shortly before this large fire. But so these are just two fires that occurred in 2021. And, so it's something that it's a really ongoing process that we need to be aware of, and really need to prepare for that threat to our forests. And one of the major factors in these wildfires are something called the grass fire cycle, which maybe some of you are already aware of, but it's really just a cycle where these fire tolerant grasses, they just tend to slowly take out our native forests because, of course, the native forests are not fire tolerant, or most of the species there are not, and it slowly gets replaced by these grasses after fires. Ungulates, obviously another really big factor to conservation as a whole, but some of the ungulates you'll find at Napu'u are cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and those are kind of the big ones there. And they do a variety of different damage to kind of different scales, sort of, but on the right there, you can see a veil tree that was severely stripped and is probably dead, most likely from either goats or sheep, which tend to do more of the stripping, but also cattle and pigs obviously have their own roles and that are damaging to the understory and trees. And of course, we have a variety of different invasive species found throughout Napu'u, particularly lantana in the middle here is kind of more of a dryland invasive plant that has, so you can see the thorns there, it dominates a lot of the understory. But more specifically on the pu'u, which is pictured here, you have kikuyu grass, which is probably the main grass on the pu'u, and it was brought in as a cattle forage, but it creates these thick mats that really smothers out a lot of regeneration and competes for water. Fountain grass pictured here growing out of a rock. And also on this right side of the pu'u, there's another really dominant species that is a very fire tolerant species and fire prone just because it tends to be very dry. So yeah, and then other species of note are these silver oak trees, which is pretty prominent on the pu'u and really in the surrounding landscape. Grows much faster than a lot of the native trees. Is also brought in kind of as a timber, but has a toxic characteristic. Is no longer desirable for timber, or yeah, excuse me, timber. And so, and then you got also the apple of Sodom pictured there in the middle, right? So that's definitely on the pu'u, but some of a great team with the Kaiolu Puʻuwaʻawaʻa has been working to actually remove a lot of that. That's a very poisonous plant that can actually kill you if you eat it. But just want to kind of, it's a cool picture. It shows just how terrific it is and how animals really won't touch it just because it's poisonous. And yeah, so now I'm just going to kind of go over some of the land use history at Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, just to kind of give you guys a bearing of kind of the various things that have gone on in this landscape. So starting in 1863 was the first formal lease that was granted. It was actually for the entire ahupua'a of Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, and it was granted to 3 Hawaiians from Oahu. And it was the first lease for ranching activities. And again, that was for Puʻuwaʻawaʻa. Most of the lands except for really the land that the native tenants were using. And then in 1865 was the next leasee, Francis Spencer. He got the lease that was formerly held by the 3 Hawaiians for kind of the same area as Puʻuwaʻawaʻa. And he integrated that into the Waimea Grazing Company. And then in 1893, also the year of the overthrow, is when Robert Hind and Eben Lowe got their lease for lands that was previously held by Francis Spencer, but also it included now lands of Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, including the Pu'u. And these 2 leaseholds actually had the longest lease holding at for Napu'u. And so fast forward to 1955, a portion of land around the Pu'u was actually removed from Robert Hines and Eben Lowe's lease, and that was actually granted to Vulcanite Limited, who is a mining company who they did some mining on the Pu'u for about 21 years, and then actually due to a number of complaints and violations to their lease, they were eventually resigned their lease. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. But and then so the next major leasee after Evan Lowe and Robert Hine was Dillingham Ranch, and they had about a 12-year lease over there. And then finally, the last leasee was Floyd Newell Bonnet. And again, due to some complaints and violations to his lease, such as illegal harvesting of koa, he actually had his lease retracted to a much smaller area, and then eventually that expired, and all of the lands of Napu'u reverted back to the state, which is now managed by the Department of Land and Natural Resources, the Division of Forestry and Wildlife. So yeah, so that kind of sums up the land history, but also I just want to go over this, just the Puʻuwaʻawaʻa cone, some of the aspects of it as well. So as I mentioned in the Mo'okua Hall, it's actually the oldest feature of Hualalai, which also means it has very well developed soils. It's composed of trachyte pumice, which is a unique eruption. And that's actually, the pumice in that eruption is kind of what the Vulcanite Limited were seeking for their mining operation. And it was actually in order to make concrete for those interested. But so yeah, and you can actually see the scar here in this image of the mining. But also, so it's about a 4,000 feet elevation at its highest point, just under 4,000. And then in the surrounding landscape, it's over 1,000 feet tall. So it's a significantly tall feature in the landscape. It also covers 460 acres of land. And I couldn't really find any sources for this, but I would argue that it's easily one of the largest pu'u in Hawaii, if not the largest. And so also the climate here, it gets about 27 inches of rain, which isn't really a lot, but due to the frequent fog cover through the area, it actually kind of creates more of a mesic habitat. So like kind of it's more of a dry habitat in this surrounding area and at the base of the pu'u. But as you move up, it becomes more mesic and throughout the rest of the pu'u. So again, taking a closer look at the pu'u, we have the Puʻuwaʻawaʻa community-based subsistence forest area, which is a relatively new installment on the pu'u. It's a 84-acre fenced unit that was completed in 2020. But if we rewind back to its conception, in 2017 is actually when the idea was brought up for it. And really it's just when the Kama'aina of Ke Kahawaiʻole kind of had this idea for a community-based area that would be reforested and kind of dedicated to more cultural and community uses. So the Division of Forestry and Wildlife kind of partnered up with the United States Forestry Service, which is my internship agency, as you guys heard earlier. And they kind of figured out a place for this to happen, and it ended up really materializing in this section, the northeast section of the pu'u. And currently, it's really managed by the Kaiāulu Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, which is a multi-organizational, multi-stakeholder entity composed of lineal descendants from Ke Kahawaiʻole, state and federal entities, and also the staff from the University of Hawaii and Apaka Foundations, which is a nonprofit organization. So really a diverse variety of stakeholders are present in this, this specific project. So really kind of just looking at the goals that for my specific project, which is a little bit more specific than the Kaiāulu Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, I was kind of really working on identifying the historic plants, any disturbances and climate trends that were present on the Puʻuwaʻawaʻa cone specifically. And then the next major goal was really just to survey the remnant native species that are on the cone. And then finally, we want to plan for the future climate conditions that are going to occur there, just to help that the PCBSFA and just the broader reforestation efforts in general to be resilient down the line. So before I begin, for those interested, I have a QR code here. If you want to take a look at some of the online resources that we looked at, I didn't include all of them, but there's a couple. But anyways, wanted to mention that before I mention some of these other ones. But yeah, so we looked at a variety of different resources for some of the information that we gained on this project, including things like the cultural assessment, and there's a biological assessment that was created. Were a really big help for a lot of the disturbances of plants. And then also, we looked at some documents such as like agriculture and forestry reports and books from the early 1900s to kind of gain some other perspectives on plants that might have been there in the past that are no longer there. We also had like notes from botanists and this is actually notes from a community meeting that occurred before I started on the project, but had some a nice extensive list of plants that the kupuna of the area actually recall growing and that they desire to grow, and really just about various plants in the area. So with all of these sources, you can see there's actually some pictures too that I'll have examples of in a couple slides. But yeah, all of these sources I was able to just kind of read through them and get as much information about the pu'u and the past that I could possibly find. And so one of the first things that was created in this process was this plant list. And it's really just a compilation of all of the plants that were mentioned from all of those previous sources I just showed you guys. And I just kind of consolidate it into as user-friendly as I can make it for managers to use. And it's a list of all of these different species that were mentioned. And as you can see, each source that was mentioned in, I kind of tallied it there. It also has basic information such as scientific, family, and distribution status. And in addition, on the bottom here, you can see there's a variety of different notes that I included, really just whatever was in that particular source pertaining to that plant. I included, such as like elevation that it might have been growing, or really like kind of the abundance that you might have seen like during that time. So like certain plants were more abundant in 1900s, obviously. So yeah, and then just kind of get a visualization of some of these plants. Keep in mind, these aren't all of the plants, but yeah, on the left here are some of the plants that were historically found on the pu'u. That not all of these are still there, but these are all extricated or gone locally extinct, but they have since actually, some of these have been outplanted. Then on the right here, these are actually all currently still on the pu'u. So together, this is kind of it gives a good visualization of some of the diversity of species that you might have found on the pu'u. One example is manele, which is a tree that is still found in the wild there. And then, like for example, haukohibi is a tree that was mentioned in a few of the sources, but although it is not wildly found there, there are some outplanted specimens which are doing great. And so this is it's kind of a blow up of that other picture, but just to kind of give you guys another idea of some of the changes that have occurred. So on the left here, you can see there's an image from 1900, and on the right there is an image from 1930. Although it's not the greatest resolution as it was over 100 years ago, you can see there's still, you can make out there's a good amount of forest cover on the pu'u in 1900, which actually lines up with kind of the first lisi, which was in 1893. So 7 years, you can imagine, we probably didn't have a lot of time to really deforest a lot. So if this picture was from 1900, there's still a lot of intact forest. But if you fast forward to 1930, you got 37 years from the first lisi. You can see kind of the damage that has occurred since then. And on the left there, you can see if you guys see what I'm seeing, it looks like it was pasture land, and a lot of it was probably deforested already on the summit area. And then even if you look in the foreground and on the right side, you can see a significant portion of the forest was already cleared for ranching. And although the angles are a little bit different, you can kind of see the same area in the 1900 photo, which has a lot less trees. And you can also see our little invasive species, the giant prickly pear, I believe it's called. So yeah, you're starting to see more invasive species as well during this time. And then here's another couple perspectives from the aerial imagery. Again, starting in 1976, you can kind of see there's a significant portion of the Puʻu is already deforested. And then even in 2006, even though there's a cloud in this image that I was able to get, it even looks like there might have been further deforestation just between these two periods, which is like a 30-year period or so. That's just probably from ungulates and potentially even further deforestation from the last leasehold on it. And then 2010, after is kind of the initial effects of reforestation here, you can see the forest is actually starting to come back. And then fast forward to 2019, which is the most recent image on this slide, significant reforestation efforts. And this is actually the Papala unit, which is the major unit on the Puʻu. That's been there since probably around 2000 and a little bit before 2010. But yeah, I just want to also bring your attention to the fact that this forest cover is predominantly koa, which was historically really not as big of a canopy a tree. So that's another kind of reason for this work, is just kind of helping to get more forest cover that was a little bit more accurate to what it was historically. But in addition to the community wants and needs too, like cultural species. So yeah, the next really big component of this project was just doing the ground surveys. And as I mentioned in this slide, actually, so I didn't do ground surveys within this area because we actually had files from previously surveyed. It was previously surveyed. So I actually basically did everything outside of this unit. So the rest of the Puʻu I did surveys for. And that really just consisted of taking a GPS point, taking the diameter and breast height of the tree, and then also getting the canopy spread, which is just how far the canopy goes in each direction. And it gives you an idea of the footprint of that tree. So real quick, we had a criteria for the species that were surveyed, and it really just included mostly just trees. We also took notes of shrubs and that sort of a thing, but we were focusing on the trees. So the canopy trees, the larger canopy overstory trees, had to be at least a 20 centimeter diameter, which includes things like ohia, koa, manele. So those kind of species had to be a little bit bigger just to ensure that they're actually old growth. And then for the smaller understory trees, such as mamane, poʻawa, kolea, smaller trees had to be at least 10 centimeters. And this is something that Jonathan Price kind of helped guide me on. But yeah, and we also took really just kind of notes on, like I mentioned, the keikis or the juveniles of species. So we didn't really leave any natives out of this survey process. It just maybe they didn't all get a GPS point, because I really would have been there probably still if we did have to do that. But yeah. So, and then another component of this survey was these old growth aggregations, which is really just for us to get an idea of kind of how the canopy, the closed canopy environments might have looked like. So basically we identified some areas where trees were aggregated and had a kind of more of a closed canopy. So as best as we could find, and then we included a little bit more detailed information, such as the percent of the canopy for each height class. And also we included like some of the non-native species, and basically we included everything in that plot area. just to give us little glimpses of what these areas included. Yeah. So this is a map that was created from all of the surveyed points with my data plus the previously surveyed data, which was in this area, although it's pretty small for you guys to see. Yeah, you can see there's quite a lot of points on this map. And this is really just to help kind of pinpoint where these species can be found. So if you want to go and collect seeds as a manager, you can try to pinpoint them from this map. And also just so you know what species were growing and are still growing on the Puʻu and kind of where they're located too. So it kind of gives you an idea of just where things should be. This is kind of a blow on the final version of the map. I actually included this too, but this just kind of breaks down some of the species compositions from the survey. So on the left here is all of my surveyed plants, and then on the right here is actually the previously surveyed plants. But you can see like outside of the Papala unit, which tends to be, there's a mix of lower land areas of it and the summit area as well. But you can see it's really dominated by Ohia. And then Kolea was actually the runner-up for next most dominant species. And then for the Papala unit, it's actually a little bit different. Mamane was actually more of the co-dominant species besides, of course, Ohia. But yeah, so this kind of just gives you an idea of what is up there. So now kind of jumping into the drought aspect, which is a big component of this work that we're trying to plan for. But so historically, Puʻuwaʻawaʻa has experienced a number of droughts. So this is actually a 100-year drought analysis, which is taken from a climate change variability that was created for Puʻuwaʻawaʻa specifically. But it really just shows the history of droughts, and the severity is really rated on like these 3 lines. So you can see the moderate droughts are here, and severe, and then extremely severe. So as you can see, in the early 1900s, there wasn't a lot of severe droughts. But then as you progress towards time, you see we actually had one of the worst droughts in recorded history just in 2010 and around that time. So climate change is clearly a big factor moving to the future. This kind of just exemplifies that. So here's just some images from 2010 drought here on the left, and then this is in 2011, I think kind of more coming out of that drought. As you can see, pretty devastating. These, I believe, are all amane trees, and you can just see how brown the grass is there. That's usually lush kikuyu grass. Yeah, and you can see even the pu'us have some brown spots. So that's something we're really trying to prepare for with this project too. So another kind of aspect that we started to work on was just designating these different climate zones on the Pu'u. So as you can see, we kind of started at 800 meters on the contour lines, and we worked all the way up to the summit and in 100 meter increments. And these are really just kind of to help designate different climates that you might see throughout the Pu'u. So as you can imagine, it progressively gets a little bit hotter or cooler as you move up, and perhaps even a little bit drier. But kind of based off of these climate zones, currently, if you look at these, it has a range, average range of about 65 in the lower zones to 61 degrees Fahrenheit and more near the summit. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it gets about 27 inches on the Pu'u. And then the projected change at the end of the century is actually supposed to be a lot warmer. So you can see the lower areas would be about 72 degrees, moving up to 68 degrees at the summit with about 5 inches less of rainfall. So these changes are kind of what we're expected to see. And really, it's really also kind of hard to judge some of the other factors such as fog cover with climate. So that's another kind of wild card that we're seeing. And also things like soil is probably not going to be that much affected by climate change. But so just to give you guys an idea of kind of what some of the changes we might see at the end of the century are like for the Puʻu. The current climate on the Puʻu, as mentioned on the early slide, will actually be similar to a site that's kind of by the highway, which is right here. And this is actually it's a unit called Uhi unit, which is very similar to these projected temperatures and rainfalls, but it's really consists of a really kauila, uhi, and that sort of a thing. So as you can see, worst case scenario, we might have some very dry climates on the Puʻu, but as I mentioned, it's kind of hard to tell exactly how dry it would be based off of cloud cover, because you get that fog drip too, which makes things a little bit harder to time for. So yeah, and so we're actually kind of still working on, but all the components I mentioned earlier are going to be used to kind of create a climate adaptation plan that will be used to inform the restoration efforts on the Puʻu. And that's kind of something that we're still working on, but we've got basically all of the pieces for that. So we just got to put it together. So some other components of the internship that I was a part of was actually some restoration work down at Hilo, which is Makai in Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, same Ahupua'a, and that was really awesome. Got to work with Avalon over there and some other awesome folks. We also got to be a part of a teaching change program, or formerly known as teaching change, or Dina Aina, where we got to go with some school groups and really do some place-based education with students from around the island on different sites, such as Hilo pictured here and Hakalaua. And another really awesome aspect was just doing some of the on-the-ground work with our friends at Kaka Foundation, who are doing the management on Puʻuwaʻawaʻa and the Puʻuwaʻawaʻa community-based subsistence forest area. It's a mouthful, I know. But we actually did one of the first ever full moon outplantings, which was super awesome to be a part of. And that's really just trying to dive back into the kind of cultural roots and like practices of using the mahina and the full moon and just the cycles of that to kind of get back into management. And then also I did some like invasive species and a variety of other work with them. And yeah, so that's like kind of ongoing work on the Puʻu, which is obviously a really big important part of this project. And then another one I wanted to mention is actually this project, which is a fellow TCBES student named Amberly, and she's working at Kanakaleo Nui, and she's looking at some of the fog interception and how that affects outplants, and she's actually capturing it with these mist nets. So I got to help her a little bit as well. And it's really cool because that Jonathan Price is both of our mentors, and it's cool because our projects are pretty tied in a way that really reflects that. Like she's looking at how you can use fog, and fog is actually a big aspect of Puʻuwaʻawaʻa. So you can see there's potential for some overlap there as well down the line. So just kind of some conclusions and to talk about the future work. Obviously, a lot has changed at Puʻuwaʻawaʻa over the last century. There's been a lot of loss of biodiversity. There's also been a plethora of disturbances such as non-native species. And climate change is definitely going to be a big part of the future for Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, especially since it's already a dry environment that's going to be getting drier. And also Kaiāulu Puʻuwaʻawaʻa and the Puʻuwaʻawaʻa Community-Based Subsistence Forestry Area, or PCBSFA. It really signifies a really important shift on the Puʻu, I think, for really kind of this land back idea for Kanaka Maoli, and really just getting Hawaiians back onto the land and helping make the decisions that go on. And also, of course, they have so much amazing mana'o and knowledge about the place, so it makes so much sense for them to be helping to manage these areas into the future. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody who's a part of this project and everybody on Zoom. And I look forward to the future work that will be done with the Pu'u. And of course, like I mentioned, I'm going to be helping to create a climate adaptation plan with all of this input and this data that I've been able to get with the help of Jonathan Price and some other folks. So that will be used to help kind of inform the future ecological and cultural management on the Pu'u. But yeah, so again, I'd just like to give a shout out to all of the people involved, Kaia'ulu, Puʻuwaʻawaʻa, of course, PICAST for funding for me on this journey and this project, and all of their affiliates, and Lisa Kennelly and all of the cohort members and friends. Mahalo nui, and yeah, I'll be happy to take some questions after.
We will just do one question because it came in the chat, if that's okay?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And the question is, are you working with the ranchers to address the ecological management?
So, so yeah, the ranchers are actually being used to some extent with the state side of the management, actually, with the Pu'u Natural Resource Management, which I actually used to work for. But they're kind of leasing out some lands and using certain lands as a heavily grazed areas, which helps as a fuel management for fire, to help reduce the risk of fire. So that's actually a project that's kind of going on. But yeah, to some extent, we're definitely working with the ranchers. And I think that for the future, that's also a really big part, just considering that there's all of these invasive, or for lack of a better word, grasses that really were brought in here, some of them for cattle management. And I think just using what they're brought in for, which is as cattle feed, does play a role in future management. So like finding kind of a rhythm of perhaps grazing and then outplanting. And if you can somehow find a middle ground, I think that definitely plays a role. And they're definitely trying to do that to some extent at Puʻuwaʻawaʻa and Pu'u. But yeah, mahalo again for